The wind sweeping down from the jagged shoulders of the Blackthorn Hills carried a cold that didn't just sting the skin, it slid beneath it, coiled around the bones, and settled there as if it had every right to stay. The prairie stretched in all directions, a vast, pale ocean of frost-stiff grass whispering under the touch of the breeze. In the distance, the hills rose like the backs of sleeping giants, their slopes patched with dark pines and the last stubborn snow from last week's storm. Hollow Creek lay in the shallow valley between them, a scattering of weather-worn houses, a feed store, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of barns whose roofs sagged under the weight of years. This was the kind of place where the land dictated the rhythm of life, and those who stayed learned to move in step with it or be driven out. Ellie Marlowe stood in the open doorway of her barn, one gloved hand resting on the rough frame, the other wrapped around a chipped enamel mug of coffee long gone cold. She was 45, her hair pulled back in a loose braid streaked with silver, her face lined by wind, sun, and the kind of grief that doesn't fade so much as it learns to sit quietly in the corner. She watched her dapple gray mare, Juniper, shift her weight in the corral, ears flicking toward the creak of the distant windmill. The horse's breath came in soft clouds, each one dissolving into the pale morning light. Ellie had been up since before dawn, moving through the quiet rituals of ranch life, checking the water troughs, scattering feed for the chickens, running her hands along the fence line to feel for weakness. She'd grown up here, on this land, under this sky. She knew its moods, its tempers, its silences. And this morning, something in the silence felt watchful. She took a sip of coffee, grimaced at its bitterness, and set the mug on the fence post. "We'll move the herd to the south pasture before the weather turns," she told Juniper, as if the horse needed convincing. "Won't take more than a couple hours." Her voice was steady, but inside, a small knot of unease tightened. The clouds on the horizon were too heavy, too still. She'd seen skies like that before, skies that promised trouble. She pulled her shearling coat tighter around her, adjusted the red bandana at her throat, a talisman of sorts, one her late brother Daniel had given her years ago, and stepped into the corral. Juniper nickered softly as Ellie swung into the saddle, the leather creaking under her weight. They set out through the north gate, the herd moving reluctantly ahead of them. Frost-stiff grass crunched under hooves, the sound sharp in the cold air. Ellie guided them with the easy authority of someone who had been doing this since she was old enough to sit a saddle. Her mind wandered as they moved, not forward, but back. She saw her father's broad, calloused hands showing her how to tie a proper knot. She heard her mother's voice calling her in for supper, the smell of stew thick in the air. And she saw Daniel, grinning as he dared her to race him to the far fence. Daniel had been gone for 30 years now, lost to a logging accident in the mountains. She still dreamed of him sometimes, dreams where he was always just out of reach, turning to say something she could never quite hear before waking. She remembered the day they buried him, the way the wind had howled through the pines as if the land itself was mourning. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of snow. Ellie glanced west. The clouds there were darker now, stacked like bruises against the horizon. She urged Juniper into a trot. The herd followed, their breath steaming in the cold. Near the old service road, she saw them, tire tracks, fresh enough that the frost hadn't yet reclaimed them. They cut across the pasture where no truck had any business being, heading toward the low hills. Ellie reined Juniper in, frowning. "Who the hell's been out here?" she muttered. She dismounted, crouched, and touched the edge of one track. The soil was damp, the impression sharp. Yesterday, maybe even this morning. She straightened slowly, scanning the hills. Nothing moved. No sound but the wind whispering through the dry grass. A memory stirred, her father's voice, low and serious. "If you see something out here that doesn't belong, you pay attention. The land remembers, even if people don't." She swung back into the saddle. Let's see where they went, girl. The tracks led her into a shallow swale, the ground here softer, the grass a duller shade. She followed them until they ended abruptly at a wide, dark depression in the earth. Juniper stopped short, ears flicking. Ellie felt the horse's unease through the reins. She dismounted again, stepping carefully toward the edge. The soil crumbled under her boots, sliding away into the hole. It wasn't just a hole. It was a wound in the earth, the edges raw, the bottom lost in shadow. She took a step closer, and the ground gave way. There was no time to shout, no time to grab for anything. The world tilted, and she was falling, the sky spinning away above her. She hit hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness and the sound of her own ragged breathing. When she could move again, she reached for the flashlight in her coat pocket. The beam cut a narrow path through the dark, revealing walls of damp earth and stone. She was in some kind of cavern, the ceiling low enough that she had to hunch. Her thigh throbbed where she'd landed, but nothing felt broken. She checked her pockets, the flashlight, a small first aid kit, a half-empty thermos of coffee. "Hey! Anyone?" she called. Only the drip of water answered. Up on the surface, Earl found Juniper near the old service road, the mare's saddle empty, Ellie's gloves still looped through the horn. Sheriff Cal Whitaker, a man with 30 years in the field, set up a command post in the feed store. Maps were spread across tables, marked with circles and lines. Volunteers combed the hills with flashlights, calling her name into the wind. They found nothing. Ellie rationed the coffee, sipping slowly to keep the cold from settling too deep. She thought of the ranch, of Juniper standing alone above, reins trailing. She thought of Earl realizing she hadn't come back. She thought of Cal organizing the search. And she thought of Daniel. In the dark, memories came sharper. She saw him at 16, leaning against the fence, talking about leaving Hollow Creek for good. She'd laughed then, told him no one ever really left. He'd smiled, but there'd been something in his eyes she hadn't understood until later. Time lost meaning underground. She marked it by the dimming of her flashlight, by the sips of water, by the sound of her own breathing. She thought about the ranch, about the work waiting for her. She thought about her parents, both gone now, and the way her mother's hands had smelled of flour and soap. She thought about Daniel, and for the first time in years, she let herself imagine him walking into the barn one morning, grinning like he used to. Late on the second day, she heard it, voices above, the scrape of rope against stone. A beam of light pierced the darkness, blinding her. "Ellie. You okay?" Cal's voice, steady, calm. She laughed, the sound breaking in her throat. "I've been better." The rope dropped, swinging gently. She tied it around her waist, felt the pull as they began to haul her up. The walls slid past her as they hauled her upward, the rope biting into her coat, the cold air rushing in to replace the damp, mineral-heavy breath of the cavern. Ellie kept her eyes on the widening circle of light above, afraid that if she looked down she'd see the darkness reaching for her again. Her hands gripped the rope so tightly her knuckles ached, but she didn't loosen them until her boots found solid ground. Cal's face was the first thing she saw, lined, weather-worn, his eyes scanning her quickly for injuries before his hand closed on her shoulder. "You're all right," he said, not as a question. Earl was there too, hat in his hands, working his mouth like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Ellie drew a long breath, the cold burning her lungs. "Juniper." "She's fine," Earl said quickly. Tied her up by the shack. "She's been pacing, though." Ellie nodded, her gaze drifting back to the hole. From up here it looked smaller, almost harmless, just a dark mouth in the earth. But she could still feel the weight of it, the way it had swallowed her without warning. They wrapped her in a blanket and led her toward the truck. The wind had picked up, carrying the first flakes of snow. She could feel the storm pressing in, the sky lowering. On the ride back to the ranch, Ellie leaned her head against the cold glass of the window. The landscape slid by, skeletal trees, the frozen creek, the distant line of the hills. She thought about the tracks she'd seen, the cut fence, the strange, scalloped prints near the service road. She thought about how the ground had given way beneath her, as if it had been waiting. Back at the ranch, Earl helped her down from the truck. Juniper whickered softly from the corral, ears pricked forward. Ellie went to her, pressing her face into the mare's warm neck, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and horse. "Good girl," she murmured. Inside the house, the heat from the wood stove wrapped around her like a second blanket. She sank into the old armchair by the fire, the one Daniel used to sprawl in after long days working the fence line. Cal stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, watching the snow begin to fall. "You said you saw tracks," he said finally. Ellie nodded. "Truck tracks. Fresh. And something else, prints I didn't recognize. Not boots. Not hooves." Cal's brow furrowed. "You think someone was out there?" "I know someone was," she said. "And I think they cut that fence on purpose." They were both silent for a moment, listening to the wind against the windows. "You should rest," Cal said at last. "We'll take another look when the weather clears." But Ellie knew she wouldn't be able to rest. Not with the image of those tracks in her mind, not with the memory of the ground giving way beneath her. She felt as if she'd brushed up against something, not just danger, but intent. That night, sleep came in fits. She dreamed of Daniel, standing at the edge of the sinkhole, looking down at her. He didn't speak, but his expression was one she remembered from childhood, the look he'd give her when he knew something she didn't, when he was daring her to figure it out. She woke before dawn, the storm still raging outside. The wind moaned around the corners of the house, and the snow had piled high against the porch. She dressed quietly, pulling on her boots and coat, and stepped out into the cold. The world was muffled, the snow swallowing sound. She made her way to the barn, Juniper's soft nicker greeting her. She saddled the mare quickly, her breath clouding in the frigid air. She didn't tell Earl where she was going. She didn't tell Cal. Some part of her knew they'd try to stop her, and she couldn't explain, not yet, why she had to go back. The ride to the service road was slow, the snow deepening with each mile. The wind cut at her face, but she kept her eyes on the horizon. When she reached the swale, the hole was half hidden under drifts, the edges softened. She dismounted, leading Juniper to a sheltered spot before approaching the sinkhole. She stood there for a long time, staring down into the darkness. The snow fell silently into it, vanishing before it reached the bottom. She thought about the prints she'd seen, the cut fence, the way the tracks had ended here. And then she saw it, half buried in the snow near the edge. She crouched, brushing the powder away with her glove. It was a piece of fabric, torn and frayed, the color faded but still recognizable. Red. Her breath caught. She knew that fabric. It was the same as the bandana Daniel had given her all those years ago. The one she'd been wearing the day he died. She straightened slowly, the wind tugging at the scrap in her hand. The snow swirled around her, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure standing on the far side of the hole, tall, broad-shouldered, watching her. But when she blinked, it was gone. Ellie closed her fist around the fabric. "The land remembers," her father had said. And now she believed it. She turned back to Juniper, mounting up and guiding the mare toward home. The snow was falling harder now, the wind rising, but she felt a strange calm settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, not yet. But she knew this wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the land was holding its secrets. And she intended to find them. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories.